This is the voice of the Report of the Week, signing on. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone listening. This is VORW Radio International, the voice of the Report of the Week. It is Thursday, the 20th of December, 2018. You also may be listening to this broadcast on Friday, the 21st, Saturday, the 22nd, or Sunday, the 23rd of December, 2018. VORW Radio International is a weekly light entertainment program which features a mixture of my talk and commentary as well as listener-requested music. VORW Radio International goes out to you each and every week online via TuneIn Radio, SoundCloud, on your phone via the TuneIn and SoundCloud radio apps. This broadcast also goes out to you on the international shortwave frequencies of 12160 kHz, 9955, 9395, 7780, 7730, 7570, 5950, 5850, and 4840 kHz. No matter how you're listening, when you're listening, or where you're listening from, I wish you good reception conditions, and I hope you enjoyed this broadcast. Well, I would officially say that we are now in the holiday season, so I say this in advance. A Merry Christmas to each and every one of you. A Happy Kwanzaa, Boxing Day, whatever you celebrate, if you celebrate anything, and just a pleasant upcoming week overall. So I hope you've been doing good this last week. I hope it's been a fine one for you. Last week for me, it actually did go by pretty quick, and I cannot complain. So, you know, the month it started out a little rocky, but thankfully it's closing out very smoothly, and I'm very thankful for that. So, two things I want to say. Number one, today's radio show is going to be one of those programs that covers the miscellaneous listener-requested topics. We're also going to get into some music, too, so do not fret, do not worry. That'll be coming up later on in the show for the most part. Secondly, I am pleased to announce that on Christmas Day, that's Tuesday, the 25th of December, 2018, so get this out to anyone who's interested. I'm going to be doing a special radio broadcast for Christmas Day. It's going to be aired on radio station WWCR on the shortwave frequency of 12160 kHz. That's 12160, 12.160 megahertz. It will be a 1-hour show beamed toward North America, and the program will be broadcast at 3 p.m. Central, that's 4 p.m. Eastern, 21 hours UTC. It's just going to be a fun little show. You know, it's going to be a very laid-back show. You know, just going to have some fun for Christmas Day. Maybe I'll play some holiday music, though I might just play anything I want. Maybe tell a few Christmas-related anecdotes or just any stories. I mean, look, if I had a very eventful sleep the night before and for some reason I want to talk about that, you know, it's my airtime. I can share what I would like to share. I just plan on making it a fun show and, you know, something to listen to. A few of you, you know, you might be getting a new shortwave radio for Christmas. Hey, it'll be a fun thing to do. You can tune in. I can guarantee you it's going to get a good signal sent your way. So, you know, why not? Mark it down on your calendar. If you have any ham radio clubs, DXing groups, spread the word. It's going to be broadcast to North America, 12160 kHz, 21 hours UTC, December 25th, 2018. So mark it down. Hope you could tune in. And on one final note, if you're listening into this broadcast right now, let's just get it done early. Send me an email if you're listening. VORWINFO@gmail.com is the address. That's VORWINFO@gmail.com, again being the email address. It's the only way that I know that anyone out there is tuned in. You know, it's not like there is any sort of detailed analytics system or metrics system. So I don't know who's listening. I really don't know how many people can be listening. Could be 5 people. Could be 150,000 people. Could be more. Could be less. Who's to say? The only way that I know that anyone's out there tuned in is if someone emails me. And trust me, it is a lot easier than it sounds. I've had multiple people that they've said, yeah, just open up my phone, open up my computer, type in is the address, VORW info@gmail.com, and all you need to do is just say, hey, I'm listening. You could be more detailed. Let me know where you're listening from, how you're listening, what shortwave frequency you're picking up the broadcast on, but that's not necessary. I just need to know that there's a person listening out there somewhere, and it takes 15 seconds or less. I mean, it is so easy, and it does such a great deal to help out this show. So if you can, please send me an email, vorwinfo@gmail.com. Alright, dear listeners, and now we go on to the part of today's broadcast where, it's by popular demand, we read and respond to your listener-suggested topics. The way this works, and if you've been a longer, regular listener, you kind of get the hang of it. Really, I open up the lines metaphorically. If you have a topic, a question, any point you want to hear my thoughts on, it is open for suggestion. Now's the time to send me an email, vorwinfo@gmail.com. That's VORW Radio International, VORWINFO@gmail.com. And again, you have any questions, you want to hear my thoughts, viewpoint, you want a suggestion, anything. I cannot guarantee that I will talk about it, because I might not be qualified to talk about it, or, it might be one of those things that's just a little too controversial to talk about it. But here's my policy. Just let me know how you're listening, and submit anything you want, okay? Because it comes down to this. If you submit nothing, I'm very likely not going to talk about that topic unless someone else does. You submit something, you're kind of throwing your suggestion out there, you're putting it into the ring, and you're giving it a solid chance to get on this show. You have nothing to lose. Let me know, and it's a fun way to really, it's you the listeners that can control this show. So let's see how many topics we have lined up here. I got them down on a sheet. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 5 for now. And as the show goes on, we might get a few more. And we'll just take it from there. So they're kind of just going from all different angles. Let's go to the first one. This is a question from Lauren B. in Pennsylvania. She said, I have a question, and I apologize if you have covered this before. Is there a difference between ham radio and shortwave? I was watching a show, and they were talking about ham radios, and went on to discuss QSL cards and such. And it seemed very similar, if not identical, to shortwave radio. Are they the same thing? I appreciate your time. So here's the way to break it down, because I understand, right? I think a lot of people, and I did a very detailed explanation about this in the last program, about what shortwave radio is. I have a feeling, though, that if people, if you just take the random person, and you ask them, well, what is ham radio? Now, it's really called, in the community, amateur radio, but I think the general public really recognizes the name as being ham radio. And they'll kind of think, about someone either on a walkie-talkie, or, just on a radio talking to someone. Unfortunately, some people have a caricatured image of a bunch of old geezers sitting there and shooting the breeze. Here is how ham radio and shortwave radio are connected, okay? Think of it this way, right? Shortwave radio is the name for a broadcast medium. Just like with AM radio, right? AM radio is the name for the broadcast medium. And then on AM radio, you have the radio stations. And then you can kind of, it's like you can take a flow chart. You have AM radio, that's the broadcast medium. Then you can have the radio stations on AM radio. Then from there you could have the news radio stations, the sports stations, the music stations, the religious stations, that really weak staticky station that sometimes if you're driving on the highway it says to tune in for traffic updates, but you can never really hear it, and everything in between. With shortwave radio, shortwave is the name for just anything, usually from, I always go between 1700 kilohertz and 30,000 kilohertz. So that's 1.7 megahertz to 30 megahertz. And anything from that beginning frequency to the end is considered shortwave radio, just because of the way these signals travel and the way they interact with the atmosphere. But then on this medium of shortwave, right, you have a lot of stuff. You have my radio show that's on shortwave radio. You have news stations like the BBC and the Voice of America. You have talk shows like Alex Jones. You have religious shows like the University Network, Overcomer Ministry. You have, all the stations from North Korea, from Cuba, right? You have all these broadcast stations. Airplanes that are going across the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, they need to have a way to reach the control towers should something go wrong. They use shortwave radio to communicate while they're over very rural areas. You have fishing boats that transmit on shortwave radio. You have pirate stations. You have number stations. You have all of these data transmissions that are used by the government. You have weather reports for the sailors out there. You have atomic clocks. And all of these things. And you also have ham radio and amateur radio. So think of it this way, right? You just have the medium of shortwave, and it's all carved up for different uses. One of those being ham radio. And ham radio, and again, I know that there are lots of ham radio operators that listen to this show, so please forgive me for not being overly technical. But there are certain frequency ranges where if you take a test and apply to the FCC, and there's all different types of licenses, you can get a ham radio license. And then using that, assuming you just stay in the ham radio bands, you can talk to other amateur radio operators from around the world. You can just talk in standard voice mode. You can use digital modes. People even still tap with the Morse code, believe it or not. And it can just be a lot of fun for people interested. I myself am not a ham radio operator, but I certainly know a lot about the medium. And when it comes down to QSL cards, of course, as an international broadcaster, I do give out QSLs to listeners who request them. I actually made a new QSL card last night, believe it or not. I figure it's been a while, so I designed a new one, so it's fresh out of the oven, so to speak, and it's there for anyone who wants it. This time, instead of featuring some fan art, I got a picture of the radio antennas from WRMI that my show goes out on. But anyway, I send out the QSLs with my show. Ham radio operators also kind of do the same thing, perhaps on a little bit of a smaller level, because part of the hobby and the interest with ham radio is if they make a contact with someone, it's called usually calling CQ, if they say get on the frequency and they say, very informally, I'm just giving an example, can anyone hear me, calling CQ, and they have, different abbreviations that they can use. And so let's say someone in Florida is a ham radio operator, they're broadcasting, they're seeing who they can reach. And someone over in New York picks up their signal. And they say, yeah, hey, I can hear you up here in New York, you're coming in loud and clear, so on and so forth. They made this contact, and they can kind of exchange QSL cards. It's just part of the hobby, think of it that way. But there is tons of crossover between shortwave and ham radio, because it's really on the same medium, at least some of it. Now I can go on and on, because there are other ham radio bands and frequencies that are not on shortwave, but keeping it specifically to shortwave radio, there is a huge amount of crossover. And I think it's one of those things that a lot of people don't really know, because we hear about ham radio, but if you're not really into the medium. You don't really know the ins and outs of it. You just know that it's there, and that's all that there is to it. So thank you very much for your question and listenership. Moving on to our next question, we hear from an online listener who goes by the name Eve, who writes, I know it's a very common topic, but I was wondering if you could talk about procrastination and how, if you experience it, you deal with it, or if you have any tips or tricks to share. Thank you for a cool show, from Eve. Thank you very much for listening in, and thank you for your question. Procrastination is one of those things that I've dealt with before. And sometimes I'll think about it. Sometimes I'll even reminisce and think about some of the things I've said in the past. The word chronic is, maybe it's an over-exaggeration, but sometimes that's how I think procrastination can be. I think procrastination can kind of be a chronic thing, where you can sit there, and of course one of the most common things when it comes down to procrastination is in the field of education, whether you're in college, pursuing that higher education, you're still in high school, middle school. For some reason, if you're still in elementary school and you're listening to the show, good luck. Or perhaps or perhaps at the workplace, you have a deadline for a project or an assignment, and you know darn well that you have to get this thing done by a specific date. But you don't. You wait until the very last minute, and then you're sitting there, you're pulling an all-nighter, you're going with the Red Bull this time around. Not the Monster Ultra Zero this time around, but I'm going with the Red Bull. It's 3 a.m., you're getting tired, you're just shaking your fist, and you're saying, why did I do this again? Why couldn't I just go ahead and work on this when I had the time to? And again, part of me thinks it's just a chronic thing. We can sit there, we could catch ourselves, and we're going to say, all right, I'm going to work on it in advance, so this doesn't happen to me again. And we'll have that mindset for a little bit, but we're going to get distracted. And we're going to start listening to some music. One thing's going to lead to another. We're going to be tired. We're going to go to sleep. And there goes a day that we wanted to use to work on our project, and it just didn't happen. Part of me thinks, and this is my opinion, so I can be dead wrong, but this is just my 2 cents. I think it really does have something to do with our attention span. For some of us, we have shorter attention spans than others. So we can try our very best to be dedicated to a project, but we're going to waver a bit. And we're gonna lose interest, whether we want to or not. And it's not going to happen. We're going to be sitting there, like you see caricatured, sitting there burning the midnight oil and getting it all done in one day and having all this free time afterward. Some people are fortunate enough that it can be that way, but I think most of us do suffer from one form of procrastination or another. Here's the best thing I can recommend to you. Number one, you gotta sit there, and you can just go through this in your mind, okay? And we're constantly thinking, we constantly have little thoughts going in and out of our mind. It's easy to just think about something. That's probably as effortless as it gets. One thing I would recommend, think about what will happen if you do not follow through with this undertaking. Think about what negative effects will come about should you not do this. So, for instance, let's say you have a very important essay for one of your college courses, and you need this essay to be submitted and submitted decently in order to get a good grade and pass the class. So tell yourself, say, look, if I don't get this thing written and do at least a passable job on it, I'm going to fail this class. It's going to cost me significantly more time and money than what would ever be lost working on this paper. A lot of us, I think we just focus on the short-term thing. Well, I can do it tomorrow. I kind of want to just play some video games. I want to stay up on a binge and listen to VORW on the international shortwave. But those few hours that you spent doing something else that could have been working on this project, well, let's say you don't go through with it. You're crunched with the time, you got the time crunch, you can't make it, fail that paper, get held back, and you have to retake the entire course. What's worth it? Losing an hour or two one day, or losing dozens of hours over the next few weeks and months because of that failure? So one important thing, and you gotta drill it in your head, is to just ask yourself, and sometimes keep asking yourself, even just write it down, get it on paper or on your screen. What will happen to me and my situation if I do not do this? The second thing to do is to try and work on something little by little. It can be a minuscule amount every day, but that certainly adds up. I'll give a little bit of an example that's been in my mind with this radio show, for instance. Every week I get about 500 pieces of correspondence that comes to this show. And I try, unless it's too out there or too whatever, I try to get some sort of reply to every single piece of correspondence. And I usually take the time to do it usually on Wednesday nights and Thursdays. And that's a lot of time to just be sitting there with responding to emails. And sometimes I've procrastinated, because I always try to get all these responses sent out on Thursday, because it's a good way to promote the show. It kind of, keeps that connection going with the listening audience, and it reminds people, oh yeah, it's Thursday. Yeah, I can listen to the new show today. Thanks for the reminder. And it's a way to build a regular audience. So I try to get it done in advance a little bit. But sometimes I procrastinate, and I'll be sitting there at 1 p.m. Thursday afternoon. The main radio airing will go out in about 4-5 hours, and I have to respond individually to, like 500 emails. And, I'll do it. It's very exhausting, but I'll do it. But on the days where I'll go ahead and I'll type the responses, even bit by bit, maybe 20 each day. I'll do, alright, even then. Alright, I'll do 5 here, I'll do 4 here. Alright, I'm feeling energized, I'll do 10 here, and you work your way up. Then by the time Thursday rolls around, oh wow, I only have 10 to respond to now. Get it? Send them all out, your work is done. It takes a lot of stress off, and just working on it progressively, bit by bit, when you got the energy in advance, it might not seem like you're really accomplishing much at first, even just writing a few sentences here and there, but in the big picture of things, you will be very, very thankful that you chipped in just a little bit here and there. I can go on longer about procrastination, but I hope that helps. One thing just from a literary perspective, if you're writing a paper, if you have an outline, it's going to go 10 times easier. I'll tell you that right now. If you have an outline for something you gotta write, that is your guidebook. That is your roadmap, and that will help you immensely. But you write a sentence here, 2 sentences there, edit a paragraph this day. It'll help it put itself together quite a bit easier than doing it last minute, 3 hours before you gotta hand it in. And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to say that, you can get every single bit done before the last minute, because I found myself in a position where almost every time before the last minute I still have something I got to work on. But building that up, instead of starting off from 0% with, just 3 hours left, checking in and you're already 60-70% done, that remaining 30% will be a breeze. So I hope that helped, and let's go on to our next question. This question comes from Jeff in Phoenix, Arizona. He sent in a nice letter. He's our resident musician. He's got a really good ear for songs. He says, I caught the show last week on SoundCloud in Phoenix, Arizona. Good stuff. I liked the Always song. The Raspberries, he said this song is a cornerstone of the power pop genre. Eric Carmen sounds like an alternate universe Paul McCartney. He liked the collective soul song of the wild guitar solo, and the Leonard Cohen piece as well. So thank you for your comments, Jeff. He's had two selections, or two suggestions. First one he wanted to hear about was opera. Do you listen to any opera music, and have you been to one? I have never been to a real opera before, but, that music, it's not something that I will listen to on a daily basis, and it's not something that I will actively seek out, but when I do hear it, the beauty of it is mesmerizing, and it is unbelievable. The way these singers can, just the things they can do with their voices, it is just beautiful. And I've listened to opera music before. I can't name a favorite piece, because I'm not a connoisseur of it. I've listened, though, to it. I remember oddly enough, it was really weird, about 10 years ago when I used to use I had this police scanner, and, it says VHF, UHF. It picked up, the police department, the firemen, public service workers, like walkie-talkie, vehicle-to-vehicle type of communications. And I remember I was scanning around once, and I heard this audio feed for a radio station there. And maybe it was one of the studio links at this point, I really don't know. But it was for a station that was called the Classical Station. And it was so weird, because it was on a frequency that I didn't think there were any broadcast stations ever on. I thought it was like at 150-something megahertz. But I remember they would play a lot of opera music, especially on the Saturdays, and I would just set the police scanner up, just leave it on that channel, and just have it going in the background for a while. And, listen to opera and classical selections when I get the chance. Sometimes Radio Romania will play some good stuff. North Korea. I was listening to The Voice of Korea, and it was either KCBS or the Pyongyang Broadcasting Service. One of them I was listening to on Shortwave the other day, and they had beautiful music. It doesn't matter really what your thoughts are on the North Korean government as a whole, but their arts and music is just such a unique thing, and I have a lot of respect for it. It was a beautiful, beautiful opera that they were playing, of course, in Korean, but it was it can just be very beautiful to listen to. Now again, he had a second question. He said, self-help books, the ones meant for a general reading audience, things like 5 Steps to a Better You, How to Win Friends, those types of books. Have you read any that you found of value, and what do you think of that type of book in general? Well, here's the thing, and I think this kind of goes along with just any of my lectures and anecdotes and any advice or suggestions people ask from me. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that these things work differently for different people. Okay, so for instance, right, if there's something, I'm just making this up, but let's say there's a self-help book, how to advance in the office, how to get that raise and that promotion, how to work your way up the corporate ladder. Perhaps one piece of advice that the author of this book said is that, you need to be very sociable. You got to be very outgoing. You got to make those connections. You got to have a lot of conversations, go to the outings and offsites and parties and this and that. Well, for some people, oh my gosh, that is so easy. I go to parties anyway. So I really just have to pretty much keep doing what I'm doing, maybe with a little more dignity, and you're telling me I can get a raise or get promoted? That's so easy. And then you'll have other people with crippling, disabling anxiety. And they're going to be shaking their head and they're going to be saying, oh, yeah, I'm not looking forward to that. Self-help books. You just have to remember that not all of the advice given in it will necessarily apply to you. Some of it will, some of it won't. So you just have to tread lightly, you have to read it, and just analyze it, look at the tips that they give you, and, just think uniquely to yourself, because everyone's different, and think, alright, well, I know me. I know how I feel, how my brain processes things. Will this suggestion work for me practically? Let me rephrase that. Will this suggestion be something that I can do, or will just fall flat on its face? So I think that those types of articles and books and, even going onto this websites like WikiHow and all that can be very useful to read up on, to take a look at, research, but you have to just understand it with critical thought and perspective, because not everything in regards to that advice will apply to you. Some will, but some won't. You just have to keep that in mind. Thank you for writing in, Jeff. This is VORW Radio International, the voice of the Report of the Week. Your questions, comments, feedback, reception reports, music requests, all are welcome. Send me an email if you're listening. It's the only way I know that anyone out there is listening in to this broadcast. So send me an email, send me a reception report, VORWINFO@gmail.com. That's VORWINFO@gmail.com. It's so easy. Last week a guy said he got an email to me in 14 seconds. That's super easy. You can just do it while I'm talking, and it does so much help so that I know that people are listening into this broadcast. Speaking of, this broadcast is brought to you by Database Pros for HR databases, HOA databases, and more great database software. Check them out. Visit db-pros.com. If you're listening to this broadcast on the West Coast, on 7730 kHz, that's 7.730 MHz, at 4 p.m. Pacific every Thursday, 5850 kHz, 5.850 MHz, at 5 p.m. Pacific every Thursday, and again on 7730 kHz, 7.730 MHz, at 8 p.m. Pacific each and every Thursday. Andrew in Mexico City has a quick topic. He wants to know what my thoughts on horror movies are. Thank you for your question, Andrew. Great to hear from someone in Mexico City. Horror movies is one of my favorite genres of films. The best horror movies that I like the zombie films, admittedly. I don't know, I just have a thing for that. Zombie movies are my favorite. Hands down, there's so many. My favorite of them all is probably 28 Days Later. That's a great one. Some of the Romero films are good. I really liked the 1970s Dawn of the Dead. Wasn't a big fan of the 2004 one, but it was just too Hollywood-ized, if you ask me. It's not a real word, but you know what I mean. There's just so many. I like, a couple of weeks ago I finally saw the one movie, Train to Busan. Maybe it's Busan. It's a film that takes place in South Korea during a zombie apocalypse. That was an incredible movie. It's one of those films that has the subtitles, but it's so good, you don't even realize it by the end. That's an awesome film. I recommend you check that one out. I also like the horror movies that kind of are, somewhat realistic, and maybe are a little... the one thing I don't like are the slasher films. The ones that just require, and all they ever want is gore. They act, wow, you see some blood and guts. Now that's what I call a movie. I disagree with that. That stuff kind of just grosses me out, turns me off, and I don't really watch the films that have that excessive bloodshed, because I don't think there's any reason. It's just needless in my opinion. That's actually, speaking of zombies, the TV series, The Walking Dead. That was why I stopped watching it. They just had so much excessive gore and violence. It was just a really big turn-off. So I like the ones, and there can be a little fighting here and there, but the ones where it's just too much, I'm just not a fan of. So thank you for your question, Andrew, in Mexico City. Oh, I also like the found footage style ones. You know, those, now they have to be done a certain way, but some of those found footage horror movies are, those can be really cool too. And we have one last topic from Rose in Brooklyn, an online and shortwave radio listener. She said, as a successful YouTuber, I thought it would be interesting to discuss your thoughts on being famous. Well, I really appreciate your generosity. I don't consider myself remotely famous. You know, there's a few people that have seen me out there and, you know, watch the videos, but I am not famous. You know, the way it goes, I bet in 10 years, no one will even know who I am or that I ever existed. You know, and that's okay. When I started this YouTube channel, I never, ever made it with an intention to try to get any sort of following. You know, I was doing it for fun. I still do. I have a lot of fun doing the channel, and especially this radio show, but I don't try to just do something to pursue the numbers. The only thing I can tell you that's just a little nerve-wracking is I am an extremely introverted person, because most people who recognize me are very, very friendly and polite, and are just wonderful, wonderful people. But sometimes I'll have people there just trying to discreetly take a photograph of me in public. Some people that'll try to harass me while I'm out. It's no fun. You know, I just wish sometimes I could just go outside and be invisible. So that's the most annoying thing. You're going to have the people that don't like you, and are going to try to inconvenience you, and that's a drawback. But you know what I always figure? I always say, well, try your best to ignore them. Try to just focus on other things, and it's easier said than done. But I just say, you know, try to forget about them, but it could still just be intimidating to go outside, so that's the biggest drawback. The best thing is just the reach that this radio show especially, and the YouTube channel has. The amount of people that it's impacted, helped out, inspired, and reached out to, you know, that's the most incredible thing of it all. It's a mixed bag, but I always try not to let any negatives outweigh the positives. So thank you for your question. Again, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, VORWINFO@gmail.com is the address to reach me at. Likewise, you have any questions, comments, feedback, reception reports, and music requests, send me an email, VORWINFO@gmail.com. Well, we've been talking about music requests, at least of the correspondence. How about we get into a few? Stay tuned and sit back, relax, grab the popcorn, and enjoy some music. It's coming up for you on VORW.